Hello, and welcome to our podcast, An Ode to Human Nature. Thank you for tuning in. This spring, we've been confronted with a crisis that has brought the world to a standstill. In this time of isolation, you might have felt lonely, but also strangely united with the global community. We have taken this opportunity to explore the life and works of John Keats, one of the greatest romantic poets in literary history. In this podcast, you'll be introduced to or reminded of his poetry and stories of his personal life. It's a story of loneliness, imperfection, passion, nature, and death. But this podcast is not a lecture on romantic poetry. It's a unique interpretation of Keats's thinking. We have chosen this story because we believe that it relates to much of our world today. We'll be looking at Keats's experience with solitude compared to our own temporary isolation during lockdown. We will then be exploring Keats's fascination with nature. This will lead us to talk about our own personal connections with nature in the current climate. We will lastly be touching upon Keats's experience with illness and mortality as he suffered from tuberculosis, a viral disease that killed the masses in the 18th to 19th century. We hope you can find comfort in the poetry that emerged from Keats's experiences that are uncannily familiar to our world today.
As we explore 3 of Keats's poems, we'll be inviting you to undertake some activities to aid your experience. All you'll need is a piece of paper and a pen. We'll reflect upon solitude, consider nature, and look to the future as we build up to writing a letter to a loved one, encompassing the thoughts and emotions we tap into throughout the journey. We hope that this activity will allow you to immerse yourself into the poems and experience Keats's words on a deeper, more personal level. We hope that this will allow you a moment of reflection and reprieve from the very estranged world we're living in today. Much like the world today, John Keats sat alone in his house. He lived in Southwark, in the depths and depravity of London's industrialised district. It's here that he wrote his first poem, O Solitude. Now, in experimenting with this poem in preparation for the podcast, the main thing we noticed was Keats' attempt to coexist with solitude. Automatically, he personifies solitude as a companion he must dwell with, so it's clearly something that haunts him and he has no choice but to succumb to its presence. Doesn't this sound familiar? We would like you to reimagine Keats' idea of solitude by thinking back to your own experience in isolation. Find a space where you can be alone. Pick up your pen and paper and collate your thoughts. How did you feel during this time? In the face of solitude and even loneliness, what would have given you comfort for the weeks ahead? Consider what might have changed. How has isolation affected your appearance and your emotions? What advice would you have given to your past self? We will give you a moment of silence after the poem to complete this task. If you need more time, you can pause the podcast for longer.
O solitude, if I must with thee dwell, let it not be among the jumbled heap of murky buildings. Climb with me the steep, nature's observatory whence the dell, its flowery slopes, its river's crystal swell may seem a span. Let me thy vigils keep, amongst boughs pavilioned where the deer's swift leap startles the wild bee from the foxglove bell.
Let's take a moment to dissect the poem a little bit. What is interesting is his ability to create powerful sounds through the language. When he says the jumbled heap of murky buildings, it reads as a cacophony of sounds through the harsh P and K consonants. This emphasises the harsh reality of an industrialised London. He invites the reader to quite literally escape this sordid reality through the imagery, climb with me the steep. Is he speaking to us, or is he speaking to solitude? We then see the contrast between the crowded city and his idealised natural haven, which he calls a nature's observatory. The sibilance in the line, its flowery slopes, its river's crystal swell, creates a calming sound, perhaps mirroring the sounds of river water. This almost transports us to the tranquility of his idyllic place. So, Keats clearly spent much time on his own where he came to produce some of his finest work. The Nature's Observatory is what he refers to as an idyllic place in which he could escape to find peace with solitude.
I think the idea of a nature's observatory is particularly important during isolation. For example, I've rediscovered my love for walking in the fields near my house. Usually I'm too busy to find the time to go on such long walks, but now that I do have the time, I would say that I'm definitely at my most peaceful and reflective in that place. Isolation in general has, I think, made people more appreciative of both the people around them and of nature, especially during this gorgeous weather we've been having recently. This relates to the themes of our next selected poem, To Autumn. Now, before we dive in, we would like you to open a window. What can you hear? Try and fixate on a sound that comes from a natural source. It might be the sounds of birds, the wind, the movement of the trees. During this poem, we would also like you to think of your nature's observatory. Is it a familiar place, or maybe it's imaginary? Is it far or close by? Do you have to step outside, or is it indoors? Maybe it's in another country. We would like you to sketch this landscape after the poem on that same piece of paper. Again, we will leave a pause after the poem for you to complete the task. Try and find inspiration through the words of Keats and through the company of your own natural environment. We hope that this task will stimulate a reprieve from the confinement of your daily life in lockdown.
Where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Think not of them. Thou's had thy music too, while barred clouds bloom the soft dying day, and touch the stubble plains with rosy hue. Then in a wailful choir the small gnats mourn among the river sallows, borne aloft, or sinking in the light wind lives or dies. And full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne, hedge crickets sing, and now with a treble soft the red breast whistles from a garden croft, and gathering swallows twitter in the skies.
The poetry of Keats contains many descriptions and ideas of nature. As a romantic poet, he believed that nature provides a meaningful insight into the human condition. He celebrated it in all its various forms: the beauty of green meadows, thick forests, thin flowers, high hills, riverbanks, fresh air, sunrises, and sunsets.
Keats's poems also contain many descriptions of women. His relationship with women changes over time as he grows from a boy to a man. He fluctuates between different emotions towards women, and many critics have deduced that this is because of his inability to balance his love for poetry with the potential love for another person. Eventually, though, he develops a deep emotional connection with a woman named Fanny Brawne, and this is heavily documented through the letters he wrote.
I cannot exist without you. I am forgetful of everything but seeing you again. My life seems to have stopped there. I see no further. You have absorbed me. I have a sensation at the present moment as though I was dissolving. I should be exquisitely miserable without the hope of soon seeing you. Love is my religion. I could die for that. I could die for you.
I think this relates to us now because of the way that Keats and Fanny corresponded. At the moment, the only way to communicate with loved ones is through the privilege of technology. Lockdown has brought about many new platforms for people to communicate, such as Houseparty and Zoom. In a sense, we are all writing virtual letters to our loved ones through text messages, social media, and even emails. Coincidentally, I've been receiving handwritten letters from some of my friends. For example, my friend Ellie sent me this. Dear Luce, I miss you so much and I hope you are well. I love seeing your music challenge every day as it either gives me new songs or reminds me of old classics I've potentially forgotten. I'm not doing the challenge, but I thought I'd tell you about a few songs you may like. I tried to pick ones that I thought would be new to you. She then went on to list some of her favourite songs for me to listen to.
Perhaps handwritten letters are the best way to express our emotions at a time like this. The fear of mortality is something that weighs on our minds now more than ever. It's no longer something we can ignore because of our current situation. The virus is taking the lives of loved ones every day, as well as taking our freedom to embrace those close to us. We have chosen a poem that confronts this reality with great virtuosity. It was Keats's final poem that was dedicated to Fanny Brawne, and it's called Bright Star. Our intention here is to pay homage to the reality of Keats's final moments. He fell gravely ill with tuberculosis, a disease that affected approximately 1 in 7 in London in the 19th century. Keats doused himself with opium to relieve his chronic pain. He became obsessed with mortality during this time and dwelled upon it constantly. He knew his fate was surely to die, so he went to Italy, resigned himself to his bed, and, of course, he wrote poetry.
We want to reflect on his legacy and take comfort in the fact that after he died, he gained everlasting adulation. More importantly, we hope this poem can offer you, the listeners, an opportunity to confront the loss of human life caused by the virus and possibly your own anxieties about the future. We ask you kindly to find a space where you can feel comfortable. This can be a bed, your favourite chair, or in the company of a household pet. We would also like you to bring your pen and paper with you and to draw your very own star before you listen to the final poem. We would like you to dedicate this star to a loved one, just like Keats did, by writing their name inside of it. This could be the name of someone you've lost or someone you're unable to see. Now is a good time to pause the podcast, take your seat, grab a pen and paper and draw your star.
Bright star, would I wear steadfast as thou art, not in alone splendour hung aloft the night, and watch the eternal lids apart, like nature's patient sleepless eremite, the moving waters at their priest-like task of pure ablution around earth's human shores, or gazing on the new soft fallen mask of snow upon the mountains and the moors, not yet still steadfast, still unchangeable, pillowed upon my fair love's ripening breast, to feel forever its soft fall and swell, awake forever in its sweet unrest, still to hear her tender taken breath, and so live ever, or else sworn to death.
In this poem, Keats longs to be as durable and as fixed as the night star watching over the world. It looks over the sea, the land, and the passing seasons, such as the soft snow touching the ground in winter. Just like a star, a letter is everlasting. We have learnt from Keats that letters can be a warming display of affection. And with that in mind, we would like you to write your letter to the friend, the family member, or the loved one whose name you writ in the star. This may take some time, so pause the podcast now to write your letter. We hope your piece of paper is filled with memories, nature, and love, a reflection of Keats's life and works.
When faced with adversity, Keats wrote poetry. When he was isolated, when he was opiated, and when he was dying, he wrote poetry. The reason why Keats's story is so relevant to us today is because he experienced solitude, nature, love, and death with great passion, and within such a short space of time. His story is a direct reflection of our lives today, and we hope that you too can find comfort in and be inspired by his words. In Keats's final moments, he wrote,
I shall soon be laid in a quiet grave. Thank God for the quiet grave. Oh, I can feel the cold earth upon me, the daisies growing over me. Over this quiet grave, it will be my first.
His close friend George, who stayed by his side until the end, wrote, having consigned himself to water, the element from which his poetry so often took life, Keats was ready to face death. Therefore, it is fitting that on Keats's grave it says,
Here lies one whose name was written in water.
Thank you very much for joining us for an Ode to Human Nature. Once you have finished your letters, make sure you send them off. We would love to hear your views on what we have discussed today, so please feel free to comment below. You could also recommend this podcast to another person, a family member, a friend, or a neighbour. Stay safe, and thank you for listening.